Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. Awesome. Great. Okay, so today I prepare, I hope you guys enjoy this presentation. So it's going to be a little bit about talking about nature, specifically networks of nature, and this concept about designing for harmonious interactions in tangible and intangible spaces. So I know this is the first time we finally get to meet each other sort of, well, personally, virtually personally. So I just wanted to introduce myself just a little bit so you kind of have a clue who's this girl, what she's talking about. So I'm an architect. I have a master's degree in architecture and technology, and I'm really passionate about urban studies, people interaction, social sciences. So I completed a Ph.D. in the UK in urban studies. I've been quite passionate about the idea, sorry, oops, this went too fast. The idea of buildings, interactions that occur in buildings, and fascinated by the fact that sometimes what we call buildings is not necessarily a thing, but is the product of a pattern of forces, is those intangible forces that come into play in order to create space. And this was actually something that was that was said by Christopher Alexander long ago, an architect that has quite heavily influential in our profession. So I've been on a quest of actually joining different platforms from an educational perspective, from a research perspective, and also trying to work directly with communities. So I'm a traveler. I try to plant seeds in every single space that I join and every single institution that I work with, especially when I work with students and communities. So now I am based in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, but I resided in Thailand for a while, where I was also teaching in university, working with communities, and now in Singapore, joining different projects, which I will share with you. Because today I would like to, focus on two main things that, let's say, amongst the overall things that I enjoy doing in terms of architecture, urban design, and teaching. I'll be focusing on design research, participation, and the idea of urban topic, and how I've managed to cross boundaries between different fields by joining an interesting network called NeuroLandscape, where we conduct different research, we conduct different activities, and basically NeuroLandscape has been an interesting journey for me. We are a team of researchers, professionals, technical, some of them are hardcore scientists in neurosciences, cognitive behavior, some others in artificial intelligence experts, and me, an architect. So we are working together to improve the living conditions in cities by creating scientific, let's say, research and bringing about all the knowledge that we can create together, working from different backgrounds. So we have a team that is spread worldwide in different countries with volunteers, academics, and practitioners that are interested in these three main topics that we address, which is artificial intelligence for mentally healthy cities, neuroscience and evidence-based design, and nature connection and mental health of communities. And I'm not going to focus on each of them. I'm just going to talk to these ones specifically, mental health connection, nature connection, and mental health of communities, because this is pretty much the project I've been coordinating, right? And I wanted to share with all of you today. So I just wanted to share a little bit of background on how this narrative all comes together. So I hope it's not too confusing. So the first project that I am coordinating with NeuroLandscape is called Planting Seeds of Empowerment, Health and Wellbeing of Communities. So this project has the aim of actually understanding health and well-being through nature connection, but from a perspective of how we can understand agency, social capital, and empowerment from a scientific point of view, and how it can be applied in projects with communities. So at the moment we are in an exploratory phase, which is about questioning, exploring context. And let's say our premise or our underlying, let's say, epistemological assumptions come from questioning what cities we are designing, cities for who has the right to the city. So of course, this is where we start questioning the idea of how people, are we conscious in the way we interact with cities? Are we conscious about the urban space and all these multitude of forces that come into play for us to have a comfortable life in cities? Or we are just basically consuming the cities, consuming the spaces in the cities without being conscious of what happens in the background. So our research focuses on working with those vulnerable communities that have been, let's say, affected by mainstream urbanism, mainstream yes, architecture, unfortunately. And this, of course, rings some bells in terms, for instance, of this sort of ill outcomes of mainstream urbanism, which is neoliberal urbanism, segregation, inequality, the way we sometimes relate in the urban space, and the segregation is clear. Of course, and all of the environmental stresses that also put us all vulnerable, make us all vulnerable, such as air pollution, noise, environmental degradation. And I think in the context of Singapore, stress is one of the biggest problems. And I will just show you a little bit about Singapore, because I think it's interesting for you guys to see a very, very successful case study, but at the same time, what are the underlying problems that society in Singapore we are facing? And of course, COVID-19 has given us this open door for shifting paradigms, right? So I'm on this quest of inviting people from different backgrounds, communities, to really start shifting paradigms in the way we understand the cities, we understand the urban space, how we relate to it. And for this, of course, we have interesting insights from Henry Lefebvre. I don't know if some of you have heard of his theories in terms of the production of space, how we relate to space, and how can we actually think of an integrated approach to communities. Because of course, we know that cities are not thought entirely to benefit all people, right? And even if they are thought, as much as we try to integrate everyone, so our question is, what about benefiting the natural environment, where that very important component is? Unfortunately, because no matter what we design and create, unfortunately, the solutions continue to harm us or nature. And I'm going to show you some examples of that now. So we are advocated towards a balanced urbanism that generates economic stability, but more importantly, unifies nature, people, and health. And this is an important notion, although I know it's quite overrated, and yes, we mention it quite often. Why is this so important? So let me just give you a little bit of background about Singapore. So Singapore, some of you might know, is considered to be one of the greenest cities in the world. In fact, it is called a city in a garden. So Singapore is a small country, just 5 million people living here, residing here. And Singapore government has made remarkable efforts. They have put remarkable efforts into designing a country that benefits society, integrating a healthcare system that's actually one of the best in the world, housing security, and more importantly, the idea of mental health and well-being has been taken seriously even before COVID happened. This, let's say, the plan of Singapore was to actually envision a city that was greener and healthier and for people. And this is what we have now, the Green Plan, which is a nationwide project that aims to basically create massive changes in the city by reducing 20% by reducing 30% of waste produced, reducing carbon footprint of buildings and urban developments, and planting trees and all over the country. And I think one of the most remarkable strategies Singapore has had is the idea of the network green, the networked green infrastructure. As I think index shows, there are many studies that show that Singaporeans have access to high quality green spaces no further than 300 meters away from the residential areas. So we are talking of a country that has created tons of efforts in terms of creating urban policies, strategies to actually benefit society in terms of nature connection. So it's like if we were looking ahead in the future and how these countries put together these enormous efforts in order to even create strategies that integrate ideas of therapeutic gardens based on scientific research and how this can benefit people. So there's no doubt all of these initiatives have created great positive impacts in society and how Singaporeans understand and live the build a natural environment and how we relate to it. Here we have the Botanical Gardens. This was, of course, last year in the lockdown, and still these very beautiful curated landscapes and spaces are just these sort of safe havens for all of us to sort of distract ourselves, to have that connection with nature, to really interact with the natural space. And here we have actually, just to show you, this is in the Botanical Garden, it is right in the city, really close to the city center. And we have otters. Otters go around, run around the botanical gardens, and in most of the landscapes around Singapore, the green parks and landscapes in Singapore, you will see different kinds of wildlife, sometimes monkeys. And I think otters is the most characteristic one. But again, not all solutions, unfortunately, are, as I mentioned before, will have the results that we want. And despite all of these efforts, there is something that the government has forgotten to account for, and is that nature, people, and health interaction. So how we interact with nature and what's going on with that. So just to let you know that actually Singaporeans haven't received quite well the, let's say, integration of biodiversity into the urban fabric. And there are several events happening across the city. So for example, otters, sometimes bumping into residential areas or private condominiums, and they, of course, they also want to enjoy the open spaces in these private condominiums. The problem comes when they actually start eating some of the fishes in the water ponds, and residents are not really happy about it. We have hummingbirds also losing fear of humans, and they come really close to the balcony. Sometimes some of them will go inside flats. Well, of course, it will cause some sort of issues, internal issues inside, will eat the domestic birds that are kept in cages. And not to mention that, yeah, scientifically, let's say there's some reports and scientific research has proven that there's an introduction of different species. As in Singapore, these sort of green biophilic features are integrated in the facades of the buildings as well. Insects are attracted. So there is actually no nice, this is not the bright side of these initiatives, especially when people start creating campaigns like this one, as the one you can see on the right-hand side, which is remove the otters from the city. People actually trying to find ways of strategies where there could be just intensify that separation with nature. So the question comes to us is, okay, nature, people, and health. So how this garden city will actually create a harmonious interaction with nature, because no matter what we do, the more nature is supposed to be, the better, but it's also creating negative impacts. So this is where we come. NeuroLandscape and questioning harmonies and relationships should be with nature. I really like this image of Antonio Mora because it shows, like, in a way we are shifting paradigms, and I think we all are advocating towards equity, towards understanding health from the different lenses. but we cannot continue forgetting that natural aspect, the environmental aspect, and how we relate to it. So we cannot keep in the same paradigm of the same walls that kept us basically, forgetting or unconscious of how badly we related to the urban space. So this is where we go. We try to understand from different perspectives, how can we bring that new consciousness of relating to the urban space through research, also through action with the community and the contact with nature, and then this direct relationship, this correlation that exists with mental health and well-being. We try to look at it from different perspectives. So this is one of some of our research scope, which is understanding different mediators and moderators that occur throughout that contact with nature and how it impacts the mental health and well-being. So we have personal mediators that are more related with psychometric behavior, with psychological behavior, and then we do it through psychometric scales, either personal perception, motivation. Also, we have activity moderators, so we measure the type of activity that is performed in the spaces, the type of programs, the participants, and very important is the features, the types and features and the character of the design, which are the environmental moderators. And finally, of course, we look at the active exposure to natural stimuli to see actually how people interact with the natural environment, what's the enjoyment in it, and look at that sort of natural engagement that occurs and how can it be integrated for future policies. So we've been on a journey of exploring adaptation strategies of communities that are exposed to extreme environments, but they are using the natural environment to strengthen, among others, their environmental awareness, agency, sense of community. I don't want to bore you with all of these sorts of concepts, but there are confounding variables that we have begun to understand in terms of interaction with nature and the notion of empowerment. But don't understand empowerment as sort of a political discourse. This is more about our agency with the natural environment in order to actually have it, create attachment, create community networks, create a sense of belonging, and more importantly, sense of community. And why is this important? And this is what we call community-led nature initiatives. In countries such as Singapore, it's actually a really key concept, especially the idea of community. And I will explain a little bit further about it, because I want to show you how we've been trying to connect some dots across the world in terms of nature community-led initiatives in some very extreme environments, low-income environments. And we have, so just to mention a few case studies in Dhaka, Bangladesh, for instance. We have also case studies coming from Medellin, Colombia, in the informal communities there. And we've seen that many of these initiatives, of course, here in Singapore as well, but Singapore has not extreme environments, but they do have bottom-up initiatives. I will explain in a minute. And we found that these environments are heavily exposed to different stresses. Social and environmental stresses have an interesting harmonious connection and interaction with nature, sort of in a synergetic way. It's sort of an ecosystem that occurs there. But how can we scientifically understand this, and how can this be translated into something practical, right? And this is what we've been trying to develop with different partners, collaborators from the European Union as well. And is this idea of identifying critical points in those extreme communities and creating those networks of safe havens, where basically these networks become living organisms to actually provide safety to each of the areas in the neighborhood. These will include different programs as each point is developed all across the networks in the community. So this includes food production, educative projects, community restaurants, community-led activities, and contemplative spots. But the key point here is that nothing is induced. Everything is inspired by the already made activities of the communities. So this is a shift here. We are not bringing programs. We are enhancing the programs that already exist, just strengthening the networks that are already existing in the communities. And what we have found in these initiatives that I already mentioned, these networks of nature in the communities, is that leaders are needed to continue the process. It's very crucial. And the individual actions might last throughout time, but might not create community, sense of community or long-lasting sense of community. And there are different levels of nature intervention according to the area and the leaders. So it is not a very simplified model. And by no means we are trying to create general models, quite the opposite. But we also understood that in these extreme environments, there is a harmonious coexistence. There is potential for emotional design, and these initiatives have the potential of healing trauma. Trauma linked to violence, inequality, segregation. But okay, how can we apply all of these in Singapore and neighboring countries, right? So this is our challenge. This is basically what we've been trying to envision, especially Singapore. Singapore is really a unique space, a unique country. But we do know that 1 out of 5 Singaporeans suffer from chronic stress or any kind of mental illness. There is this connection from nature, although as I show you, the natural infrastructure is vast and well developed. And there is neighbors and communities disconnection, which is hard to believe. Everyone is basically in their own units. There is not that, let's say, social cohesive behavior noticeable, especially in the residential areas. So we continue to explore here in Singapore different variables through different methods, research methods. How can we understand eudemonic health and well-being in Singapore? Again, bringing back all those concepts that we have found throughout all of our case studies. Placemaking, nature connection, empowerment, sense of community. How can this actually work in Singaporean context? How can we apply it? So we have here an interesting case study. Before I jump into the case study, just want to mention that sense of community here in Singapore is such a contested concept and difficult to grasp in here. And sometimes it's difficult because even let's say the initiatives that come from the government promote that individuality, that sort of segregation between people. So here I just wanted to show you, this is in Singapore West Coast Park. And this area, so after COVID, people realized that they wanted to do some sort of more urban farming activities. And there's a shortage of land in Singapore. So there's always that huge issue here in Singapore. There is no land really to develop. So what the government had to do basically was to clear a large part of forest area in order to create these sort of community garden initiatives where each of them is rented for people. One of them belongs to each one. So people that want to rent or they have to apply and go through the process of selection. But is this really sense of community? Will this really foster sense of community, or is this more for individual enjoyment? Which also is, of course, it is reasonable, but in a country that has so many problems in terms of that community union, that sort of manifesting that sort of social cohesion. So these kind of initiatives also don't show much about benefit in the long term. So again, the question here, leaders was a key word for us to translate into Singaporean context. And then we start finding, despite the fact that we thought we wouldn't find, very interesting initiatives occurring in Singapore. So here I show you a project that I've been involved. That also we have the pleasure and the blessing of being part of with this organization called Ground Up Initiative in Singapore. They've been for over a decade creating nature placemaking activities. The nature placemaking activities have the aim of creating this sort of notion of stronger community through 5 core principles. The 5 Gs, they call it. The 5 Gs talk about being gracious, green, giving, grounded, and grateful. And I know this sounds a little bit romantic, right? But indeed, it has been the core principle of this organization that has changed over 100,000 of lives in Singapore through different activities that connect people to nature from a different perspective. GUI, Ground Up Initiative, they have a absolutely organic space. So nature grows widely. There is not a curated space. People go and interact in different activities from farming, sketching in the wild, earth oven, just cooking, and wood workshop, for instance. So people just directly interacting with the wood, making the things. Just to remind you a little bit, in Singapore, the government is very generous. So basically they provide nearly everything for Singaporeans here. So there's very little action people have in the urban space. The initiatives have to come from either these kind of organizations, otherwise you wouldn't see people really active in order to create them. So we began to investigate, okay, what's special with this organization, what they have to teach us, why the 5 Gs, why they are enhancing that consciousness of connecting with nature from a different perspective. Why do they need to connect people with nature, which Singapore is already contributing so much nature? So we start our investigation and we start finding correlations between different psychometric indicators such as sense of community, sense of social cohesion, intrinsic motivation, self-esteem, and numbers of programs that people attend, the frequency they go to these places. And basically what we found in here was that similar to what we found in the other countries and extreme environments, these kind of initiatives have the same capacity of creating harmonious coexistence with nature and others, and it has the potential of healing trauma, which was really interesting finding for us, right? Healing trauma. And then we understood that here we don't talk about leaders, right? We are not talking about leaders anymore. We are talking about facilitators of space and how they live as an example, translating those 5G principles into each of the activities people engage. And then we start finding that, yes, of course, there is these different values that come into place and that create this intangible, let's say, way of interacting with the space that makes it unique, and how this can be done with the already existent beautiful landscapes and how people can start relating to these landscapes from a different perspective. That is the challenge, right? Because GUI, we found that there is a high level of therapeutic characteristics in the space, non-curated natural spaces, which is correlated with hands-on experience. People being able to naturally just simply be in the wild, the organic representation of nature. It was a revelation for us because the landscapes in Singapore are beautifully designed, but still are not creating the same similar effects and positive effects that these very organic, non-curated spaces are creating in citizens, and those therapeutic values and benefits that they get. Again, just to start finishing here, and I don't want to take more of this time, and we can discuss, is this utopia or a must? Really, it's about empowerment, but empowerment that comes from the ground, right? Understanding those values, right? Could be the 5Gs for GUI. It could be other values that we see in other contexts, but it's about creating those networks, right? It's creating that consciousness that we need to ground in terms of how we interact with nature, how we become conscious to it, and how we integrate in the urban fabric. It is really now, it is more important than ever. And I think just to conclude, I like this quote by Jean-Paul Sartre, is the idea that man is not the sum of what he has already, right? But rather the sum of what he does not yet have, or what he could have. So the potential is there. And I know COVID brought a lot of tension and a lot of challenges, but it brought that shift of paradigms. So we hope to continue helping the shift in paradigms in the future and having more people also questioning and wondering about it. And I'm not sure if we have time for discussion, but I would really be delighted to hear your feedback, what you have to say about it. Have you heard before about nature placemaking methods in your own communities, your districts? What would be your side of things? I would be really happy to hear you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Diana. Thank you for that. First and foremost, forgive me for not being on screen. I just have a lot going on in the background right now. I do have a question. You talked earlier in the presentation about being conscious about the spaces we use. And we haven't typically thought about environmental degradation as an intersection of public health or as a cause of health traumas and inequities. In Singapore or in your research, is there any like verifiable data, or do you have statistics on improvements of individual health outcomes because of integration of nature?
Absolutely. There is actually there's research constantly developed by the Livable Cities research group, which is research group that is also work directly with the government. They are constantly, and also the National University of Singapore, and the university I work with, social sciences, Singapore University of Social Sciences. We are constantly understanding how these new the adaptation process occurs. There is scientific data available, and it's all online, especially if you want to learn more about it. I would say the Livable Cities research group, it is showing how actually, of course, benefits of nature and the health and well-being of people, but at the same time, what are also the downsides of it and how this can affect people, especially in terms of social behavior, how we relate to nature. So there is plenty of data in Singapore, in fact, to actually find references.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Diana, can you repeat what the 5 Gs are?
Absolutely. Gracious, green, giving, grounded, and grateful. I think we are going to go soon. 20 seconds left. I think Beth is going to close our rooms.
Hey, Diana, thank you very much. That was a really wonderful presentation. I wish we had more time to ask you questions. Do you know what the root causes of the stress are? I don't know if you can tell me in 10 seconds, but.
Singapore, yeah, working hours, very intense, okay. And social family expectation as well. And also very compact city.
Don't worry. Ed, you personally are not till September, so you're good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We just realized at the very end that we did not record our session, so
neither did we. Chloe, you're not alone.
Oh, no. That's okay. Maybe